Hello, welcome back to the teachers. It's time to do another teacher commentary. There's quite a bit that we can say about teaching some of the things we have seen so far. So what I want to show you today is just one tool to help teach control flow. Control flow is one of these really fundamental concepts that you have to understand as a beginning programmer, and that sometimes if we are familiar with programming, forget how hard it actually is to understand initially. It becomes so natural, so second nature that sometimes we don't really think about it very much. But understanding control flow initially for young learners can be one of the challenges. And I'll show you today how to use breakpoints and the debugger to illustrate control flow. And control flow, of course, becomes relevant with all control constructs, for example, if statements, but also method calls, and then of course in loops, although we haven't seen loops yet, but in loops that will of course become just as relevant again. But let's just first look at if statements and method calls. Okay, have a look. I have here this bouncy ball example. So when I run this, I can put my balls in here by clicking, and I can show you control flow examples with both if statements and method calls. Let's look at an if statement first. For example, here we have an if statement. So depending on what the value is of my alpha variable, I will get into one or the other of the branches of this if statement. And if we want to illustrate that to students, we can set a breakpoint here. There is this area to the left of my code, and if I click here, that sets a breakpoint. So I have now a breakpoint here in that line in the change transparency method. So if I now execute my program, immediately as soon as we hit the breakpoint, and that is almost instantly after restarting this project, because every one of those balls will execute this method every time at every act step. So in the first act step we are getting there. So here we are getting a debugger window popping up. I can just make this a little bit bigger, and execution stops. And here if we look at the editor, we see that we are stopped at this breakpoint now. It tells me here in the information area that I'm stopped at a breakpoint. I get this black arrow in here, and I get this debugger window popping up. In the debugger window, I can see the values of all the variables. I have here static variables, that's my constant. I've got instance variables, and I've got a local variable. The local variable is the one that I've just declared here in the line above. I have here declared my img variable, and I see I've got it here, and it's an object reference. I've got the alpha variable here, and I can't see it here at all. That's a local variable, and that is because the highlighted line, the line that this arrow points to, has not yet been executed. So this variable has not been created. But I can now continue. Well, continue would just continue the running. I can step. If I step, I just go one step further here in my program. And so now I see that execution now, as indicated by this arrow, is in the next line, and I see now I have a variable here of type int called alpha, and the current value is 142. So the transparency of this object that I'm looking at now is 142. And so I would expect you can ask your students to predict where we will go next. And alpha, if it is greater than 0, and it is, so we should go in here. So if I do a step now, I can see now we are going in here. And if I step again now, what will we expect? Where will we go? We can try that out. And a step, and we see from here we jump straight to the end of the method. So that show just one step through an if statement. I can step again, and there we see we've just come out of the change transparency method, and we are at the end of the act method. We can also observe control flow by looking at method calls. For example, here, if I set another breakpoint at the beginning of the act method, and then I say continue. If I say continue, execution will continue until I run into the next breakpoint. So I say continue, and now I am here in the next act cycle, or in the same act cycle in a different ball. So I'm at the beginning of an act method, and I'm stopped before the call to my move method. Now I can either, if the next step is a method call, I can either use step or step into. If I use step, it executes this line as a single instruction and just goes one line down. So if I do step, it will go to the next line in my source code. If I use step into, and there is a method call on that line, then I'm actually going into that method call, and I will see the execution line by line. So here I've got a method call for addWorldEdge. If I say step into, then I'm stepping into the addWorldEdge method, and I am here. It shows me here the stack, essentially what's called call sequence. So here I was in the act method, and now I'm at the addWorldEdge method. I can go back, I can select this and see where in the act method I was, where I came from, and then the addWorldEdge method was called. So that's on top of the stack now, and that is where we are right now. And now I can watch the control flow through here by stepping through here and see, okay, that was obviously not true, that was not true either, and then there's another if else, and here I've got a case where I actually jumped into the else statement, and I step, and then I have returned here into the act method. So if I step again now, because the addWorldEdge was false, I jumped over the if statement, and I'm going there. And now I can either just step, which will just step over the change transparency in one go, or I can step into this. Okay, this is there. Actually, I was stopped at the next breakpoint because there's a breakpoint, and we can go on observing this here. I can remove my breakpoints by just clicking on them again and then say continue, and then my execution will just continue as normal. Okay, that's enough. Play around with the debugger a bit. You can get the debugger up just by setting breakpoints anywhere in the code where you think there's an interesting bit of code, and by single stepping through your code and watching your variables, you can get a lot of insight how the program works. Bye bye.